Hello everybody, welcome to the module on SharePoint Search. This is one of the modules in the course about SharePoint building blocks. And so this module fits in, talking a little about search and how we can take advantage of it. So Scott, you're going to talk to us about search today?
Yeah, we'll do that. Okay, so the official title for this course is Deep Dive into Search Scenarios in Office 365. And what we'll be covering in this module is we're going to do 4 blocks here. We're going to talk an overview of search, so a little bit of overview information for those that may not be familiar with search in SharePoint. We're going to look at the search building blocks, so what do we have to make search solutions out of? And then we're going to look at 2 specific kinds of solutions that we can create. We'll call those extending the Search Center and then search-based apps. So let's do a little bit of an overview here. Before we get started into anything too deep, let's kind of position ourselves and get our feet under us and get ready to get started. So, Andrew, talk to us a little bit about the overall vision for development in Office 365.
The overall vision slide, we've seen this a few times in these modules.
You see it every time.
Every time. So it really falls on 3 different pillars. We got extending Office everywhere, connecting to the Office 365 services, and then building using an open platform. The idea here is that first on the extending Office everywhere is that being able to leverage Office and all the powers of Office 365 throughout all the different tools and products that they give us, between Outlook and Word to the server-based products in 365 like Yammer and SharePoint. Everywhere that we're used to doing all of our work, we want to be able to take advantage of all of this stuff as an Office developer. The next pillar is all around connecting to 365 services. And the way we do that is with the different APIs and SDKs that Microsoft gives us. Specifically around the APIs, we have things like the REST API and the CSOM. We've talked about those in this course. But then there's other APIs too, like the Office 365 APIs. And all of these allow you to get to your data and interact with your data, both within SharePoint and within the rest of Office 365, like files and like mail and messages and calendar and contacts. And then one last piece of the pillar here, that's going to be building using an open platform. This is not just a standard .NET-based platform that we're working with all the time. Microsoft, specifically Office Dev, is doing a phenomenal job to give us tools to work on any platform that we want to choose to work on, even if it's not a Microsoft platform or a Microsoft language. If it's one of the other mobile platforms or things that are out there, there are SDKs available for all of these things working cross-platform. The only point of it is, let's give you all the tools and all the resources possible in order to connect to Office 365 and SharePoint to create the best applications for your customers.
All right, great. Thanks, Andrew. And before we dig into anything too deep, let's kind of position search in among all the other pieces of SharePoint that we've been learning about. So we'll return to this diagram we've seen a few times, SharePoint app building blocks, and we can see that search is listed down here in the service applications. So we've got the search service down here in the service applications area. And so it's one of the service applications that we can take advantage of when we're creating things inside of SharePoint. And that's really what this module is all about, how to leverage that. All right, so what's the real value of search? Well, the thing for me is I'm a real believer in search. I really like search a lot. Andrew, I'm fond of saying that search is great because it's the only thing in SharePoint that knows where all the bodies are buried, right? There's really nothing else. There's really nothing else that crawls all the deep, dark corners of SharePoint and can find things. So I like to encourage developers to think of search as the ultimate data access technology. It knows where everything is inside of SharePoint, documents, list items, etc. But we can also make some great solutions with it, doing things like extending the Search Center, so taking that standard Search Center that SharePoint provides us out of the box and use it to create unique things and some unexpected things that people might not have thought were possible. And really, we're going to see without necessarily even writing any code. And then the other value is to be able to go at the Search API. We've talked about CSOM and REST in this course, and we're going to show you how you can use CSOM and REST to get at the Search API so that you can use that wonderful data access technology in the apps that you create. All right, so Andrew, the other thing is the Office Dev Center, right? So we also want to emphasize that Office Dev Center a lot, right? This is kind of our home base, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. I mean, this is where it points to all the documentation. There's a bunch of training stuff that's out there, all learning resources. This is the place we go for everything.
All right, great. All right, so with our feet kind of under us now, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the building blocks that we have available to us as application developers within Search. Here's the list that we're going to be talking about. When I talk about the building blocks, I'm talking about these 5 things: managed properties, result sources, query rules, result types, and search navigation. And we're going to spend a little bit of time on each one of these so they're clear to everybody what they are and ultimately how we can use them. So the first thing we're going to start with is managed properties. Managed properties to me are really the heart and soul of Search. A managed property is something that's mapped to a crawled property. Now, when I first say that to you, if it doesn't resonate, if you don't understand what a mapped or crawled property is, it can be a bit confusing, but actually it's relatively simple in concept. When SharePoint crawls an external resource or an internal resource within SharePoint or something it's connected to externally, as it's crawling, it finds properties out there, like in a document library, in a list, and from that crawl creates what we call crawled properties. And you can sort of think of these as columns in a very large database table. And every time Search finds a new property, it creates a new column in that mythical large database table, and it puts the values in there. Now, the thing about crawled properties is that crawled properties can have strange names associated with them, and they're the kinds of names that you really wouldn't want to ask an end user to search against. So, maybe there's a property that means the title of the document, but it's labeled as OWS _Q _title, and it's just unreasonable to use that and present it to an end user. So instead what we do is we create something called managed properties. And what managed properties do is they map to crawled properties, and they give us a more user-friendly way to not only get to these crawled properties that potentially have strange names, but also I can map multiple crawled properties to a single managed property. So I can take, for example, the definition of title across many different repositories and bring it all together in one place so that when I search against title, which is in fact a managed property in SharePoint, when I do that, I search all the titles. The other great thing about managed properties is they work within the keyword query language, so I can write queries, property-based queries, specifically against them. So I can ask for something like title contains SharePoint. So managed properties are really, again, the heart and soul of Search. We can create our own managed properties, but we'll also find that there are cases in which SharePoint creates them for us to kind of help us out. But we'll need to either create our own or utilize ones that are available already in all the search solutions that we create. Managed properties in SharePoint 2013 have a lot of power associated with them, and they actually have their own properties, if you will, that are associated with them. So they can behave differently depending upon what it is that they're set up to do. And by that I mean that we have these properties such as, are they queryable, which means that a property can be used in a property-based search, like title contains SharePoint. Are they refinable, which means that the property can be used to refine search results that you get. Retrievable means that they can be shown in search results on a results page. Searchable means that the value of the managed property is available not only for property-based queries, but also for free text queries. So that means that if you search for a word and that managed property is designated as searchable, the text of that value will be searched as well. Sortable, a very powerful concept here, allows me to sort search results by a managed property. This is really critical in many of the apps that we create. So if you're creating an app, for example, that has information about users in your organization, then perhaps you want to sort by last name alphabetically and then by first name alphabetically. So that would be possible if your managed property is designated as sortable. We have some additional properties in here such as type and safe and alias and multivalued, which perform some other functions for us, but the ones that I just talked about are really the key ones you care about with managed properties. All right, moving on from managed properties, the next key building block we have is a result source. A result source can be thought of as a subset of the larger index. So when SharePoint is crawling all the various content sources, it creates an index full of all the property-based and free text information. But when we create applications, we quite often don't want to search against the entire index. We may only be interested in, for example, calendar events or task list items or Word documents. So we're generally interested in a much more specific subset of content. And what a result source allows me to do is to use keyword query language to apply a query transformation and define a subset of the source, the larger index that I want to use inside of my application. So again, this is very powerful because it immediately allows me to narrow down the huge index that I have into just the types of things that I'm interested in working against in my custom solutions. The next building block that we have are query rules. What query rules allow us to do is apply to a given result source some kind of query that should be processed under specific conditions. For example, we could do something like a keyword match. So a classic example is I can say, look for the end user typing the word deck into the search engine. And when they type the word deck, we're going to assume that what they really mean is they're looking for a PowerPoint presentation. So what happens in a query rule is I can detect behavior like a certain type of word that's typed into search and then respond by transforming the query from the keyword deck to a property-based query such as file extension is PPTX. So you see how that works. That allows you to create rules where people can use vernacular keywords and then you can transform it into a very strict query. And this makes search much more accessible to the end user, and it allows you to essentially create your own search language that's based on your business and the terms that you use within your business. So very powerful building block for us as well. The next building block is the result type. Result types are bound to a given result source and are defined by a rule, and what they allow us to do is they allow us to change the way the search results are displayed. This is extremely important because as you're dealing with different types of data in the search results, you want to display them in a way that's meaningful for that data. Now, this is something that we're all familiar with when we use the internet, right? So if you go to Bing and you do a search, sure, you can type in a keyword, that's great, and you'll begin to get a bunch of results back. So you go to Bing, you type in sheepdogs, you get all these results for sheep, all these results for dogs, right? And then at the top, you have all the different things that you can be looking for. So, for example, you could click on images, and now you're going to get pictures of sheep and pictures of dogs, and maybe some pictures of sheepdogs, that type of thing. You could also look for videos, for example, right? And when we're looking for these different types of things like images or videos, our expectation is that they will be delivered to us in a way that's appropriate for that content. And what I mean by that is if you look at images in the Bing search engine, you expect to see the images, right? And if I look for videos, then I expect to be able to see the videos or even play the videos inside the result source itself. And so that's something to keep in mind as you're designing your SharePoint apps that are based on search. You want to bring back the results in a way that's meaningful to the end user and allows the end user to operate on those results within the sources that they see. And that's what the result types are going to help us do. The next one that we have that's closely related to the result type is the concept of a display template. So within a result source, when we're changing the way that the results appear, then we're going to use a display template to do that. So a display template is kind of a mix, if you will, of HTML and some JavaScript. And we'll go over some of this in detail when we do the demo. But you can see here in my simple little display template slide that I have a sort of nugget of HTML that is going to define the way that a result should appear in the search engine for a particular kind of thing. Again, more on that when we do the demo. The last piece to talk about is the search navigation. The search navigation is particularly tied to the Search Center, and what it does is it allows you to move between the different facets in the Search Center. So just as I said in Bing, you have things like images or videos that you can search against. We have the same kind of concept in the Search Center in SharePoint, where I get out-of-the-box behaviors like everything, people, conversation, and videos. But I could also add my own to it, so I could have tasks or calendar items that I'm looking for, and I can use the navigation of Search Center to add my own customized apps to that list of things that are possible ways to see the search results. When you're creating these building blocks inside of search, many of them can be done with no code at all. So, Andrew, if you're thinking about this, being able to create with no code at all sort of makes the browser like a tool, like a developer's tool, right?
It turns into an IDE, yes.
Which is pretty interesting, right? Now, thinking of the browser as almost an IDE. But, I need a way, though, if it's going to be my IDE and I'm a professional developer, I need a way to be able to move, right, from dev to QA to production.
Got to export your settings.
Right. So search lets me do that. Right here you can see we're talking about the export and import of these search settings. So within SharePoint, what we can do is we can export the result sources that we make, etc., into an XML file called searchconfiguration.xml, and then import them into another environment. And we'll also see when we do one of the demos that we can include this XML file in the apps that we create, and then these settings can get put into SharePoint when our app is installed. Okay, great. So those are the building blocks that we have to work with. And now what we're going to do is we're going to move on to some very specific types of solutions that can be created using these building blocks. And the first thing that we're going to do is extend the Search Center. Now, the key thing here about extending the Search Center is I'm going to do this work, this type of work, really, as I said, with no code or precious little code at all. So this is a fairly easy way to get started creating some powerful search solutions directly inside of SharePoint, just using the browser. When I create a custom search center, when I customize that, what I'm really looking to do is customize the search results experience. So I'm going to be using the building blocks to create custom solutions inside the search center. Now, when I do that, we're going to observe a couple of key concepts here. What I'm going to do is narrow the focus of the Search Center to deal with something I care about, like events or tasks or videos or something like that. And then I'm going to change the way the results are presented so that they are appropriate for that particular thing. And what you're looking at here on this slide is just a screenshot of the demo that I'll show you in just a minute here, that is set up to show people a list of their tasks. So this is specifically targeted at task searching, and it presents tasks in a way that's meaningful and allows you to, to work on them as an end user who has assigned tasks. When we're creating these Search Center modifications, one of the things that we're going to see as we walk through the demo is, yes, it's great that we can do these things with no code at all, but we're also going to find that, it's sort of a double-edged sword, right? Because, if I do things with no code at all, it's great that I don't have to write code, but, then I actually have to do a lot of clicking maybe and configuring, that type of thing, right? So I may find that after I've developed my solution, I might prefer a more automated way to get that solution deployed or installed inside of another environment. And one of the ways that we can do that is to automate the installation of these modifications using a remote event receiver. So we talked a little bit about remote event receivers, and if we use the app install event, then we could use that to automate some of the things that are happening inside of SharePoint. And I already mentioned a little bit that we can also take that exported search configuration and put it into our apps. So, what we're getting at here, and I'll show you a little bit more as we go along, but what we're getting at here is there are options for whether or not you want to, do all the configuration manually, or do I want to actually try to automate some of that configuration by writing a remote event receiver that might do some of this programmatically for me? If we think about how that works, then one of the things we might want to do is within our remote event receiver be able to do things like activate features. So here you can just see a very simple example of how I'm using the client object model to activate features. Here's a concept of uploading a display template and putting it inside of a document library. And also maybe even the ability to manipulate web parts that are on the page. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time grinding through the code in these particular slides. I think what we'll do is we'll look at these things as we work our way through the demo. Now this slide that we're looking right here is just an example of the exported search configuration XML that we had talked about earlier. One of the key things here, as again we'll see in the demo when I go into it, is you'll notice that I've highlighted this very special area where we have deploy to parent. The key thing I want to focus on in this slide at the moment is you can take the search configuration, export it from SharePoint, add it to your app, and have your app reinstall it in the new environment when your app gets installed. And if you set this deploy to parent value to true, it will actually push those configuration values up into the site collection area and make them available throughout the site collection, which is a very powerful way to get your search modifications deployed. Okay, so that's kind of an overview of all the building blocks that we have. Let's get into actually making some changes here by doing a demonstration of extending the Search Center inside of SharePoint. I'm going to go ahead and go into a test environment that I have here. So this is just, Andrew, this is just a test environment that I created specifically for this, this lecture that we're doing right here. So it's just got a little bit of test data in it. And my idea here is I want to go ahead and modify the Search Center in order to work with tasks. So, if you think about the idea of working inside of SharePoint. When people get inside of SharePoint, it doesn't take them very long to figure out that there's lots of different sites and things can be splattered all over the place, right?
Absolutely, yep.
So just think about tasks for just a second. They could be anywhere, right?
All over the
place, right?
Yeah. Hard to find them.
Right. So then somebody says, hey, how am I supposed to find all my tasks in SharePoint?
Did you get that thing done?
Right. I just realized there's 1,000 sites. Am I supposed to look in every site? So, one of the things that we find right away is that end users of SharePoint will immediately begin to ask for what I like to call aggregation solutions. So what they say to you is, hey, look, I could have tasks anywhere in SharePoint. Can't you just bring them all into one place and show them to me? And then, what's happened traditionally is in a lot of organizations, somebody may have used the object model to actually programmatically try to go around SharePoint and accumulate these tasks. And Andrew's over here smiling at me, right? So
you always get the request, too.
So let's loop through all the web applications, loop through all the site collections, loop through all the sites, right? And then,
on demand.
On demand. And then let's put it on the home page of the portal so that it's hit by 100,000 people.
Why is it slow in the morning?
I don't understand.
Why is it slow right after lunch?
Right, exactly, right? So all of these aggregation solutions that we're talking about are made much easier through search because I can just issue a query and ask the search engine for it. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to show you a little example of how you can do that. So again, if I return to just my, my test site here, you'll see that I've got some task lists floating around in here, and here's just a simple example of a task list, and I've got some others that are floating around in here. This one just has one instructing me to get my act together. Apparently I'm overdue on that.
Well overdue.
Right? But, I've got them all over the place. So what if I want to see all of my tasks and do it in a simple way? Well, what we can do is extend the Search Center. So I'm going to come over here to this link that says My Tasks. I'm going to click on this. This is going to take me to a special extended Search Center here where I can see all of my tasks. Now, you can see there's the Get Your Act Together task, right? So that was clearly on the list. But also there's a bunch of others in here that came from various lists. So the first thing for people to understand about looking at this solution is it doesn't matter where the task list is in the SharePoint farm. The search engine is going to find it. It's going to know that it's associated with me, that it's my task, and when I run this solution, it's going to show it to me. When somebody else runs this solution, if Andrew runs this solution, it will show him his tasks. The other thing to note about this solution is that the information is presented in a way that is appropriate for the type of information. So in our case, tasks. So when you look at the results, what you see is we've put a pretty little task icon next to each one. And also notice that the due date turns red if it's overdue. So that's clearly an appropriate type of behavior for tasks. It's something I would expect. And then, what I can do is for any of these, I can go ahead and click on these guys, and then it will take me to the particular task at hand and allow me to update it, right? Which is exactly the type of thing that I would expect, right? So this is a great aggregation solution, going around and using search to grab what's necessary. Now, how did we put this together? We put this together using our search building blocks. So let's start with managed properties. There are several managed properties involved in this solution. You can access managed properties at a bunch of different levels in SharePoint. You can access them at the tenant level, at the site collection level, or at the site level. From here, if I just come to the drop down and I bring up site settings, and we go to the site settings for my site, you'll see that on the site settings page, there's an entire section here dedicated to search, and we can find, manage, and crawled properties here under the schema link. So again, at the tenant level, at the site collection level, and at the site level, you will find crawled and managed properties that you can access. And so, if you wanted to come in here and learn a little bit more, you could type something in the title here and do a little bit of filtering. And now you can see the various managed properties that we have that are associated with, in this case, with the keyword title. And then also you can see the behaviors that are supported by each one of these that I addressed in the slide, right? So is it sortable? Is it retrievable? Is it searchable, queryable? Those types of things. We can also create new managed properties and map them to crawled properties, again, at the tenant level, at the site collection level, or at the site level. Okay, so with that in mind then, the first thing that we need to do for any of these extending the Search Center solutions is to create a result source. So I'll come into the site settings here, and on the site settings, we'll go back down to the search section, and I'm going to go ahead and click on result sources. To create a new result source, I would simply click on the new result source, but we've got one here already called tasks. This is the one we're using. And then I'm just going to go ahead and edit this so we can see how it's made. First, we're going to give it a name. And then the next thing is we're going to specify what larger index we want to use. Remember, a result source is a subset of the larger SharePoint index. And so most of the time what you're going to be doing is you're going to be using the local SharePoint index, but you have some options here that go beyond that. And so in our case, that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to be looking at a subset of the local SharePoint index. And now the next thing that we have to do is to write a keyword query language, KQL query, that will define the subset of the larger index that we're interested in using. So I can do that here directly inside of my browser by clicking this Launch Query Builder button, which brings up a nice little window for me and allows me to define the basic query that I want to use. Now, you'll see that I've got some tooling here that kind of helps me pick in plain English the type of things that I care about and the managed properties that I might want to use. And then I can just click these buttons. But basically what it does is it helps me build up the query that I want to use. So I'm going to take a second just to look at this in a little bit of detail. I'm going to go ahead and just copy it out of here. And let's throw it in Notepad so we get a little bit more room to work on things. And we'll wrap it. And I'm going to break it down like this. And I'm going to break it down a little bit more. And let's look at what we have. This is classic keyword query language inside of SharePoint. These are property-based searches that use a managed property on the left and then a value on the right, a managed property on the left, and a value on the right, a managed property on the left, a value on the right. So what is this thing saying? The first thing it's saying is content class is STS underscore list item underscore tasks. The content class managed property is probably the most powerful managed property in SharePoint, and it has special values. You sort of have to know the dirty little secret here to know what special values are there. But this special value, STS underscore list item tasks, basically says I'm only interested in task items. I don't want to see anything else. So right away you can see that my task-based solution has helped a lot by defining a result source that only considers tasks. But now I want to consider tasks only for the current user, not for everyone. So the next thing that I do is look in the Assign To managed property, and then I'm going to use the special token that says the current user. So this French brace user.name French brace says include the username of whoever is running this query. And that's why my solution is going to show the tasks for me if I run it, for Andrew if he runs it. And then the last thing we're doing is we're defining that basically the item is not complete if the percent complete does not equal 100. So my results are not going to bring back tasks you did last year that are already done. Nobody wants to see that. It's only going to bring back things that you still have to do. Okay, so if you're in here inside the query builder, you can build up this KQL, and then you can hit the test query over here, and you can see that I'm getting reasonable results over here. Things look like exactly what I want. I can go a little bit further, and I can apply sorting. We talked about that. I can select a managed property that I want to sort by. So maybe I want to sort by the created date, or perhaps by the due date I'd like to sort, right? Those could all be meaningful ways that I want to see these results. Okay, and when I'm all done with that, I can just go ahead and click Save, and I now would have a result source named Tasks. So in order to use this, all I really have to do now is come back to my search results page. And here on my search results page, I can go ahead and edit this page. And when I edit this page, we'll see that there's a web part on here that's driving the search results. And then I can drop this thing down, say edit the web part, change the query, and here's where the magic really kicks in. Up here on the basics, I can select a result source to use, and you can see right here that I've selected the task result source to use in my solution. So this is what ensures that the current page is using that result source and only showing tasks. So right there, I could stop. I could stop right there and I would be done with my solution. That's the simplest thing you have to do. The only thing is that I would still see the results in the sort of out-of-the-box way. And I'm really kind of interested in creating a solution that gives a special look and feel to these tasks. So in order to do that, the next thing that I'm going to have to do, and let's just go ahead and publish out of this. The next thing I'm going to do is to create a result source. So we're going to come down to the site settings, and here in the search section, click on result types, and the result type is going to allow me to format the look of the task. So you can see that I've created a task result type here, and if I click on this and we say edit, we can kind of see how it's made up. And the result type is given a name, task, simple, and it's associated with the task's result source. So this formatting of the display will only occur when items come from the task's source. So that means that I already know that they are only and forever going to be tasks. Okay, so the way this works is that we're going to associate a template with this, and the template here we can see is called task template. So the task template is an HTML JavaScript template that we create and upload into the master page gallery. Here inside of Visual Studio, I've already taken the liberty to open this thing up so we can see it. And if you look at this, it's kind of interesting. Let's just go ahead and look at it from top to bottom. And you'll notice that it certainly has, some HTML chunks inside of here. But then it's also got this rather interesting part where it looks like JavaScript, right? But it's kind of commented out JavaScript. So it's a very interesting templating mechanism that is particular to SharePoint 2013 that involves meshing together JavaScript and HTML. The JavaScript is kind of commented out in this very special way and embedded in line with the HTML. Now, the way to get started is to basically go to the master page gallery, into the display templates folder, and download one of the default templates and then start modifying. You wouldn't want to create this by hand from scratch. But if we look at some of the highlights of this template, what we'll see is that the template is based on managed properties, and then those managed properties are used as placeholder tokens to determine what the results look like. So coming back in, we can see up in the top part here that I've got this managed property mapping, and it's dictating what managed properties are being used. So we can see title, path, description, assigned to, all things that we would expect, the due date right there. And then if I go down into the templating area, you can see that I get a div section for each search result. I'm going to get this div section, and then you'll notice that within the div section, we have spans that say things like assigned to, and then underscore pound equals CTX current item assigned to. What's going on here is this is the placeholder for the current value of the assigned to property. So what's happening is that we're getting a div tag for each result in the each search result that comes back, and for each managed property, it's being inserted in the proper place inside the HTML. But we can go a little bit further and not just use HTML, but also use JavaScript. So for example, in my due date, I wanted my due date to turn red if it were overdue. So I accomplished that with a simple JavaScript function call, where in the due date span section, you can see that instead of a managed property, I'm calling the JavaScript function getFormattedDate. The getFormattedDate function is up here, and then what it does is it goes through and it gets the current value of the date for that particular result source, determines if it's overdue, and if it is, it returns some styling information to either color it red or color it black based on it being overdue or not. So this shows you the simplicity with which you can create these types of solutions using the building blocks that we showed earlier. And for the most part, we've got a no-code solution here. Okay, the template itself requires a little bit of what we might call coding, but for the most part, we're using just configuration. And then, as I said, the last thing to really look at is once we're happy with what we've got, we can come into the site settings. We can go down to the search section here, and we can do a configuration export. And this configuration export will export an XML file for us that contains the configuration changes that we've made, the result sources that we've defined, and then we can grab that XML and we can use the import to go ahead and import that. And I'm just going to go ahead and cancel that out, import that into another environment. You like that?
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's pretty nice, right?
That's very effective.
And that's how your browser becomes an IDE. Okay, so that's the first thing to show. Now, what we're going to do is let's move on to our second type of solution, which is search-based apps. So the first one was kind of a no-code thing. That was fun, right? Now what we're going to do is look at what if we want to write some code and make this happen. All right, so when we're talking about search-based apps, we are primarily talking about apps that go against the search API, either REST or CSOM. So actually, it's pretty simple to do because all you're going to do is run a query, and then once you get the results back, you can do whatever you want with them because it's an app and you have full control to display them in any way you want. So the first thing we'll look at is the RESTful endpoint. The RESTful endpoint for search is located at _API, as you would expect, /search, /query, then the query parameter is query text equals, and you can include any valid KQL that you want in that RESTful endpoint. And you can see I've got some examples here. So I have query text equals test, so just a plain old free text. And I've included select properties. So the second one, basically what it does is it brings back the title and rank for me and no other properties. And then you can see in the third one that we've got an example of sorting. So much like we saw when we used REST against a regular list, you can sort of think of this RESTful endpoint with search as almost like you're querying a giant list and you're using REST to bring back those results. So once you've got that, well, we could basically stop now and you can use everything else you've learned in this course to just go ahead and take that data, bind it to some kind of UI, and display it. Well, if you're using JavaScript, then what you're probably doing is just using Ajax. And as we've said over and over and over again, it's basically the same thing. So I can simply use $Ajax, jQuery Ajax call, and just build up that URI, make a call, and have a success and error function.
It looks just like the REST stuff that we did in the REST module.
Yeah, exactly,
too,
right?
Yeah.
I mean, isn't that really the message here? Is that you can take that exact code that we just looked at and just use it over and over and over and over again. Just change the URL, right? It's beautiful, right?
Yep.
Then, if your preference, though, is to use the client-side object model, we don't limit you. You could certainly do that. So there's a client-side object model equivalent, which uses the keyword query. So you can see the client.search.query.keyword query object, and then you set the query text with whatever valid KQL you want. That's what we're doing right there. And then you go ahead and execute that using the search executor. And the search executor brings back results, and then those results would have a success or fail function, and once again, you would just go through and parse them. Well, not to be outdone, we can also do this with C#, right? So we have JavaScript versions, and we also have C# versions, and we've seen this before, right? Yep. Andrew, you showed us this before. This is just using C# and REST. There's nothing magic about this. This is just using a different URI, and here I'm using an HTTP client to make the RESTful call. I'm including the access token down here, which is, of course, necessary. Have to have that access token to prove I'm able to do it. And, of course, we can use C# and the client-side object model as well. So here is the equivalent of using the keyword query and the search executor from C# instead of JavaScript. So you have all the different options to make that query. Another thing to note here, though, is permissions for the app. So in order for an app to be able to run a search-based query, it needs to have permission to do that. The only permission you need to worry about is the query as user ignore app principal. This is a very special permission in SharePoint because what it says is that the query is going to always and forever be run in the name of the user who is running the app and never in any other way, right? So we've learned in the past that apps could elevate permissions, but Andrew, it would be a real problem if an app elevated permissions and then tried to run a query, right?
Well, because you lose all the capabilities of the security trimming that you're going to get in search.
Exactly.
Because then you lose the context of who the person is that's making the query.
Right. So the nightmare scenario is somebody runs a query with elevated permission and they get back a document that says
salaries.
Salary information, right? And they go, I'm going to click on that, and it says access denied, right? But you already know it's there, the damage is done, that type of thing. So we always want to run these as the user who is currently using it.
Yep.
Okay, great. So let's take a look then at an example of a search-based app and how ridiculously easy these things can be. I'm going to come back here into Visual Studio, and what I'm going to show you now is I'm going to show you a simple app. Let's go ahead and run it that creates an employee directory. Another very common request is to create an employee directory that's based on A through Z sorting. And got to log into my tenant here. Get it right, okay? So, we all know that SharePoint has people search, but the truth is that, when you do people search, it's sorted by your social distance from people and not necessarily A through Z, right? So I found that in every version of SharePoint, I always get requested to make something that's the old Rolodex, right? I want to click the letter and see everybody. And so here what we're doing is we've created that Rolodex solution with the A through Zs. You can see them up here. And what we're going to do is issue a search query that is looking for people whose last name starts with that letter. So if I click on H, not surprisingly, this thing is going to run, and it's going to bring back my name there, right? And it has my email address, phone number, that kind of thing, right? So the classic Rolodex. And this is really very, very easy to do. So let's take a look inside of Visual Studio and see how we made that happen. Well, what you're looking at here inside of Visual Studio is a provider-hosted app. So I'm going to have, as we expect, two projects. The first one is the SharePoint project, which really doesn't contain anything other than the app manifest. Now, for us, the thing we care about most with the app manifest is the search permission, right? So there it is, query as user, ignore app principal. That's the privilege we need in order to build this search-based application. The second part is the provider-hosted app itself. And here what I've done is I've built an MVC application, and so I have a home controller that's running our query for us. If I open this up so we can see it a little bit more. We'll see that I've got, one simple method here in the controller that is taking the start letter. So this is the A through Z coming in. And then what it does is it comes down here and gets us a context and an access token that we're going to need. And then it builds up the URI that we need in order to search. So let's look at this carefully here. This is query text, last name, and then the start letter. So that's the query that we're running. And then we don't need to bring back everything, so we've only asked for, last name, first name, work email, phone, okay? The source that we're running it against is this big nasty GUID right here. This is kind of interesting because this source ID is the ID for people search, and that's what I want to run against. And for those of you that are looking at it, this ID is not special to my environment. This is the ID for people search. It's the same in on-premises. It's the same in the cloud. That's the ID for people search. So it's very simple to just snag that value and use it yourself. And then the last thing you'll see is that I'm sorting over here, in this case by first name ascending. And then all I'm going to do is make a RESTful call. So there's my HTTP client. I'm going to go ahead and set up with my bearer token. So there's my access token being sent in. And then I just go ahead and make the call, get a response. And the rest of this is just parsing out the results in order to build up a collection. And that collection is then passed off to the view model for display. You can also see that, Andrew, that when I set this thing up that for some reason, I used my own personal phone number, so I just had to go ahead and comment that out and hammer in a phone number that wouldn't have the people watching this video call me and ask me why the demos don't work.
Yeah, it's a good lead opportunity, though, if you ask me.
That's right, good lead opportunity. Now it's more like, I'm working the lab and it doesn't work. Okay, so those are the key things that you need in order to get these apps to work. It's really just the same thing we've shown you many times. Once you know the RESTful endpoint or the CSOM approach, you just use that and then you're in full control over the UI. Okay, jumping back then, let's kind of wrap up what we have done here. So in this module, what we did was we did a little bit of overview of search just so you can understand how it fits in and why we're excited about it and what's powerful about it. We looked at the search building blocks like managed properties and result sources and how those fit into the larger development picture. And then we looked at two very specific kinds of applications. Extending the Search Center, which for the most part is a no-code type of solution you can do directly in the browser. And then search-based applications, which is an all-code solution that uses the REST and CSOM endpoints. Okay, so going forward, Andrew, we want people to have the kinds of resources they need to get started. So take us through some of the places they can go.
Absolutely. First place to go to, dev.office.com. That's going to be your homepage for all developer things Office related. They got quick and easy links to go download the tools and get them installed on your machine to get started. Also to sign up for a developer test tenant on Office 365. There's a really cool API sandbox that you can use to test out the Office 365 APIs against a live tenant with some sample data inside of it. So you have to write any code to get everything up and running. And then finally, there are links to all the training resources that are available to you out on the different resources that Microsoft has provided for Office Dev, from what we'll find on github.com. If you look at github.com/Office Dev, you'll find a repository called Training Content. It's going to contain all of the slides and demos and code and labs for a lot of the all the modules that we've done here in this course. So all the stuff that Scott showed, there's labs associated with it, or you can go through and get a nice step-by-step walkthrough of how you can do it on your own developer tenant.
All right, and what if I wanted to provide some feedback on all this,
Best place to go, there's a bunch of different options here. It really depends on what you're looking for. If you've got questions, Stack Overflow is a great place to ask questions to get answers to your technical things. Tag it with MS-Office so that they can find those things very easily. There's a Yammer network, the Office 365 network. It's a public network that anybody can join into. Great place for conversations, even conferences that are coming up. People do that. All great news going on around it. They do Yam Jams, would get together good conversations and stuff. Really good resource. And then if you've got ideas for the product, if you have features that you want to provide, if you have feedback for specific features where you want to improve upon them or you want to change things or whatever, go to officespdev.uservoice.com and submit something and then see if people voted up and have a discussion around it. The Office team looks at these things on a weekly basis. They triage them on a weekly basis. They may come back to you for some more information. I've seen things that I've submitted actually go in and get rolled into the product even just recently. So you can be part of the solution instead of just complaining about, why don't you do this, right? They actually are listening, they actually act on it. And it's really cool feedback loop that they've adopted in the last year or so that we didn't see for a long time with SharePoint. So it's really cool to see this new stuff.
Sounds great. Okay, good. Well, I mean, at this point, I think we've done everything that we needed to do. Hopefully everybody's got a good feel for what search can do for them, and you're excited to get out there and try some things. Really appreciate you spending the time with Andrew and myself, and we look forward to seeing you in some of the future modules.
Yeah, thanks a lot.